Hey everyone, welcome back with yet another episode of Modern SaaS. Today we have some interesting topic. This is something we were internally discussing. Yag, do you want to share the world what were you discussing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited for this. So, for the last few weeks, we have been discussing internally as to how to hit our revenue numbers to get where we want to. And more importantly, there was this conversation where we thought, hey, can we get some sort of predictability into where we want to get? So, I think first things first, is revenue predictable? Can we make revenue predictable? Is it possible at all?
Obviously, it's not a prediction in the sense that you want to predict super accurately, but there has been a lot of topics about this. People have been discussing how to build predictable revenue, and every SaaS organization, or not necessarily SaaS, every organization wants to have that level of forecasting ability to predict that what numbers they're going to hit it. And in my opinion, yes, it is possible. It sounds futuristic and all of that. Can we really predict things? Obviously, there are a lot of external factors come into play where your predictions might not work. But if you look at how the sales has evolved, is almost like a science. There is a art element to it, but there's also science element to it. And when you think about what is truly the predictable revenue, it's going to come down to what processes that do you have and what control do you have throughout these processes to really identify, okay, you are going to follow this process and then are you going to hit those numbers or not? So in my opinion, short answer is yes, we can do it, but there's so much more under that. We can talk about some of those things as well.
Right. So the reason why I asked this is, in the world of marketing, majority of the times when we say, prediction for 2022 or 2023 and so on, it is more often than not more of a wish list. It's either an extrapolation of what has happened in the past. You will hear things like, hey, there's going to be an increased investment in content marketing. And we know this, it's going to happen, right? Or you're going to say that the future is conversation intelligence because I'm part of a conversation intelligence company, right? So in sales, how does that work? There is a lot of external factors. One thing that, having worked with you closely, I know that you are a super process oriented person, and there is a lot of focus on how to do X, Y, and Z. But the reason why I asked this specifically is, there is a salesperson involved, there is a prospecting process involved, and then there is a whole other element external to the company where there is customers and prospects. So how can we predict and bring all these things into a process?
Fair enough. So I think you're right. So when people typically talk about predictions, a lot of it comes around opinions or wish lists or thoughts that the way you have. With revenue, you don't want to take those chances. You don't want to have a wish list. Yes, it is a goal. The way I think about it is at the end of the day, it starts with some goal that you want to define yourself as an organization, as a team. And then you start backtracking it. Okay, if you want to hit this number, if you want to hit this revenue goal, how do we get there? And right to your point that there will be people involved, how many resources we need and all of that. I've learned also this from other people who have written a great kind of content around these areas, or even books. There is a book by Aaron Ross about whole predictable revenue, and the whole idea about predictable revenue comes down to some common numbers that people have seen. What's typically your conversion rate look like? What's typically your deal velocity look like? So how many people you need? So if you have this close rate, and then if you have this salesperson, what how many salespeople you need to achieve those numbers. So the whole aspect of predictable revenue comes down to the science aspect of it, thinking about it as a step-by-step process and really breaking it down into what are the conversion rates across each of these steps. We'll get into tactical stuff as well, but there is one philosophical way to think about it is predictable revenue happens because you have a predictable pipeline. And predictable pipeline essentially is telling you every month what's your pipeline look like, how many deals that are in your pipeline that you're talking to customer, what potential revenue booking size would look like. Now obviously every company has their own different conversion rates. So some people would have 30% win rate, some people have 50%. So based on that, you can see what's the pipeline coverage you need to have that assurance that we will be able to hit those sales for this month, looking at our historical performance as well. And few things are also probably changing, so you might improve some of the things in your conversion ratio. Demo to close rate might get better because you're investing in coaching, or your lead conversion to the opportunity is becoming better because now you've started covering some additional use cases that the leads were initially being disqualified for. So you will continue to improve these rates over the period as well. But the whole notion is that to have a predictable revenue, you've got to have a predictable pipeline. What's that pipeline coverage look like? And but to take it to the next level, now predictable pipeline doesn't happen unless you have predictable ways to get the channels itself working or to different have leads acquired in the pipeline. And one of the things that you talked about is marketing. So you can also now start dividing into what channels are really working here for us. So now you're saying, okay, marketing channel is driving these many leads, and outbound channel could be another one that you want to start with. And you are saying, okay, how many demos are each individual SDR is booking? And there's also variation of it because maybe your new SDRs are probably booking less demos versus your more experienced SDRs are booking these many demos. So getting into that detailed level of understanding each channel and trying to say each channel is driving me these kind of revenue or these kind of leads, which potentially could become this kind of pipeline, is how you're going to the next step. So predictable revenue means the predictable pipeline. Predictable pipeline happens when you have predictable prospecting or lead generation.
Sorry, I'm going to interview you and ask you a couple of questions. Based
Sure.
on
Go ahead.
my past experience, there are a couple of things that I've seen. In fact, I began my career in sales, and one of the mandate process that was given to me was, "Hey, Yag, make 125 calls every day." And
Hmm.
that as a process for me was like, it was not working. Okay, to me, I would rather spend time on identifying who are the kind of people that resonated better with us, and try and identify where these people hang out, reach out to
Hmm.
them, and
Hmm.
then the conversion was much higher. Probably, in those days, I would have made only, say, 6 calls a day or 10 calls a day at max, but still I was able to book. But on the contrary, the process fallback was like this. The process fallback was, yes, this works. When this works, you're hitting the numbers, that's great. But when the results are not working, you will be measured back to, are you making those number of calls every day? So is that process, there should be some logic to the process. I agree to the fact that you said, hey, look back the channels, this channel is contributing so and so to the pipeline, so this year I'll invest this much more on this. So how do you actually arrive at that process?
I do believe there is truth to it. Once you decide that, okay, I'm going to do prospecting, let's say outbound motion in this case that you talked about, my point is that predictable prospecting happens when you have a predictable person. And what does that predictable person means? That somebody who does certain things with repeatable process. And what does that even that means? Like how can somebody be a predictable person? Which means that you have a predictable day, you have a predictable routine or week that you're doing every single week. What does predictable day look like? That means you're blocking certain things on your calendar to do certain activity, certain set of things that you're going to repeat every single time. And what does that mean? That okay, so how do I do that? So that means that I have to define routine, I have to have that habits. So predictable habits is naturally, if I'm going to do calling, then do I have to block time on my calendar for all the outbound activity? If your goal was given to you by, okay, call these 100 leads or 100 contacts, yes, that's great. But now somebody told you to do those, but they didn't tell you, or maybe you should also think about it. Can I do more research about who these are before I call them? So, can you
Yeah.
block time on your calendar before you do the calling block? Is there any time for the research block on your calendar so that you don't miss that? And if you don't block it, it's not going to happen. Something else is going to come on your plate. For that particular day, you're going to miss that research. And then you're going to pick up the phone and you're going to find miserable because there's no context. You were just calling out of the blue, throwing darts in dark, and really nothing is working out. So the more you have this routine that you have developed for yourself, how are you doing that every single day activity? That's how I think about it. So to your point, you're absolutely right. Management can come up with, the leadership can come up with high level goals, but it's an individual's responsibility as well to become that predictable person, predictable salesperson, to define your own goals. Your management is not going to, ideally, they should not be telling you, block this time, do this at this minute, and this, that will become a micromanagement. But if you as an individual don't do that, then somebody will have to come and step in and have to tell you that this is how you need to structure your day. And I think that my fundamental point about this whole predictable process is, yeah, is the control that you are going to have, things that you control rather than things that are you are not controlling. as we talked about earlier on, that market shift might happen. You never know what market is going to collapse at what point. These currently we are in this war situation, which are going to have some economic impacts as well. And when you think about
Yeah.
these things, you don't predict these things. You don't know what's going to happen yet. But at least if that's going to impact to you, it's also probably going to impact everyone else. At least the things that you can focus on is things that you control. This how you do this research really well, what messaging that you use in your calling so that it resonates well. That research and that thing is what you control. So to me, it's predictable pipeline happens when you start taking that, breaking it down into multiple steps, and really start taking things in your control.
That makes a lot of sense. And here's the interesting part to look at, right? So there are always going to be certain people in the company who are great at what they are doing. So for example, when I hear our calls on a daily basis, certain
Mhm.
people's call, it looks like a cakewalk. The conversation is so gelled in with one another, and then it looks like, hey, this is going to close the moment you hear that conversation.
Yeah,
Whereas it doesn't happen with everyone. And I know for a fact that everybody puts in time to do that research, but how
yeah.
do we make sure that there is a level playing field so that this process goes to the next level? Because I love the fact that there is predictable prospecting, which you do the
Mhm.
research and all of that, but once you get on the call, yes, you also have a plan about hitting these 4 or 5 things that I have to do on the call. That's fine. From there, can we make this common across the table, so that it does not have a difference between salesperson A and salesperson B?
You're absolutely right. You don't want to come across very scripted in these some of these conversations, and this is where our conversation early on, how the buyer experience we want to provide, it should feel natural as well. But here's what I think:
Yeah.
you are, or who you are is what you repeatedly do. So you become who you are, and what you do things repeatedly is what will define you. And so these things sometimes, because you have a predictable way of doing certain things, the more you do those things again and again, eventually it becomes your habit. So excellence can be achieved if you have these habits itself on a day-to-day basis. So you don't have to remember that, oh, I have to hit these 4 things. That becomes a scripted. They say that practice trumps everything, right? So you have to have that habit that you define, or things that you define. These are the things I'm going to do. Early on, it might look like little scripted, but the more you do, it will become natural to you. At that point, it will not feel like, oh, this person is just reading through the script versus this person is naturally having conversation. No, that person had gone through the same phase. It's just that now they have, it's part of their brain. That's how they normally do.
Absolutely. And is this common for both inbound and outbound? Because there are going to be certain people who are comfortable only with inbound. And when something comes in inbound, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, hey, I know what your requirement is. I know, like, say, if I'm looking at what is your number of licenses that you require, I know what company you're coming in from. And, I can do my research. But can you control the same amount of things when you go outbound? That's the most interesting question, because outbound, you don't know the requirement. You might at best go with the best guess that you have and
Yeah.
some research and all of that. But how do you make sure that that message resonates with the person whom I'm talking to?
Again, taking this, there are a lot of nuances about this. What we're talking about the predictable revenue, yes, absolutely, you can have an outbound motion with predictable revenue as well. The whole point of predictable revenue also started with how you can build predictable pipeline with the sales development efforts. When you think about
Yeah.
inbound marketing, there's also notion of you're not controlling things, how many leads that you're going to visit. Maybe with paid ads, you can control how many visits that you're going to come to your website. And maybe you also have a notion of what that conversion will look from those paid leads to converting into demo requests or trial requests, something like that. The whole concept of outbound was that you know how many hours you have in a day, how many calls an individual can make, how many emails that they can send, and how many follow-ups they can book, how many meetings essentially they can book at the end of the month. So the more and more you have that level of understanding, you are able to say that, okay, one person can roughly book between 15 to 25 meetings a month. That's a lot more predictability there, rather than expecting some PR event or some marketing event is going to go viral and I'm going to expect something out of it, which you don't fully control a lot of the times. So to me, yes, outbound is predictable starting from the prospecting itself. Now, to your point, in the discovery, do you know what the requirements are? Yes, that's where also you're now saying that, okay, looking at it, out of 20 meetings that were booked, maybe 12 were qualified and the 8 were not qualified. Then you go back and you say, okay, why they were not qualified? Then you look at certain signals. Maybe we reached out to folks who had different language requirement or who different integrations requirement. So can you start filtering those requirements early on in your process itself? So predictable pipeline also happens, obviously, or prospecting also helps when you have that very well defined ICP, which is your ideal customer profile. The sharper your ICP is, the better success you're going to have. Then your messaging is that, hey, we have helped a lot of sales development leaders with these kind of things, or we have helped customer success leaders. And so you know what problems, how you're helping customer success leaders. And when you're reaching out to them, your goal is to, we still want to learn what is your world currently look like, but talking to 100 other customer success leaders, here is how they have shared their pain points or challenges, and here is how we have helped them. So, to your point, I do believe that you can bring that predictability in outbound process when you start defining a very crystal clear ideal customer profile. When you're going too broad, that's when you'll start seeing then you're not really having that level of predictability.
Right. Ever since I joined Avoma, a couple of things that I learned new, which I had not seen in some of my previous organizations. First thing was the usage of ICP in a different way. Traditionally, we as marketers talk about it as ideal customer profile. But the first time when I came in here, I saw you using this term initial customer profile. And I
Yeah.
didn't, I was like, is this another buzz term? And when I looked at it, I realized what, it relates to what you're talking right now, because where you have that predictably saying that, hey, sales or customer success is the first person who is going to buy my product. They are my initial customer profile, and then the
Yes.
expansion can happen later. And then what I realized is, when I can go back and look at the set of people involved in that particular deal, I can, reciprocate or create a replica of that. And I can make that my predictable list and say that, hey, if I use this kind of a list, maybe 80% of it might resonate with my message. This is one. The second aspect is, even in the predictability aspect, I also looked at the way customer success works, right?
Hmm.
So, especially in the world of SaaS, your revenue expansion is what really matters. One
Hmm.
of the things that you often look at is, if a customer stays with you for longer, then that
Hmm.
helps. But that's not easy for most SaaS companies. And
Hmm.
when you look at a proper conversational intelligence kind of a situation, what I really saw here was that, hey, a CS person can be involved and can listen to and understand this entire piece from day one, so
Hmm.
that they can have the context and bring in all their experience. Otherwise, most of the cases, what used to happen in the past was, the salesperson used to promise something, the customer success is not aware of it, and
Yeah.
then customer success is surprised by the request, so on and so forth. So talk to us finally about the last process about routine, which I really really loved. Is it only about setting a certain time for certain things, or is it also about how you go about doing it, or laying out a process of how to's in each of these?
Yeah, so it does come across in every aspect of what we do. My whole philosophy of this whole predictable revenue comes down to, as I mentioned, there are a lot of different tactical things that you can go deeper, but it also starts with an individual. So
Yeah.
let it be an SDR, let it be an account executive, or even let it be a customer success manager. Everyone, if you define an habit or routine that how you're going to run your day, what that process is going to look like, blocking your time, taking your time at the end of the day to review all the things that happen in the day, or planning your day ahead of time that what's going to happen tomorrow. So to me, it might come across very philosophical. So I'm not going to go into all the specific details right now here, but it boils down to you as an individual. Are you a predictable person? The more predictable you are, yes, it sounds boring. Nobody wants to be predictable as well, but again, in a lot of the situations you can be unpredictable person in things that are creative and outside your life. But in business, in professional setting, a lot of the time people are also expecting, can we expect certain outcome from everyone? And I wouldn't say you need to be a robot to do all of these things. So that might come across really negatively, that if you have predictable life, predictable person, what they're trying to do is same thing every single day. It's going to be monotonous, it's going to be boring and all of that. But you also have to have a lens that Yes, the routine is monotonous or the blocks are monotonous, but each conversation is unique with every single prospect or customer. So I'm going to take interest in those. I'm going to cherish every single conversation and make it as natural, as authentic as possible. So to me, it boils down to how your every single function in the company is predictable. So the handoff process, what SDR once they book a meeting, how they hand off from SDR to account executive. Can account executive expect certain thing from an SDR every single meeting before that they have the context well defined? If you build that process internally really well, then account executive knows exactly how to look for information, what to do, all of that stuff. When the handoff happens from account executive to customer success person, do you again have account handoff routine developed there that account executives are always following when they're announcing deals? One, are they sharing enough context? How did we win this deal? What use case they have? So on and so forth. You don't have to tell this. So this is a responsibility each individual can take. You can build these playbooks, but at the end of the day, people who take this responsibility at heart and follow this process, they are going to see less friction in their deals. They are going to see their people who are depending on them are happier. They are willing to help them more. You always see this in companies internally when you're building these companies. Some people get frustrated with some specific set of people because they always drag you down. They want you to do more work with them to get that same kind of information. But there is this other set of people who are very easygoing. They're always on top of things. They're always giving you information ahead of time. The context is always provided. So you don't have to nag them. You don't have to chase them. So your energy becomes naturally happier. You're willing to work with them. You want to help with them. If you look at this whole life cycle of a customer's entire journey or even internal all other things, this is what I say that it comes down to every single thing that you do. You customer sharing requirement or filing a bug or issue, how you're passing that information with your engineering team. Are you walking two steps ahead, getting all the information they require versus just telling what the customer told? Then your engineering comes back and says that, can you give me more information? Then you again go back to your customer, so that, can you give me more information again? Look at the back and forth, and that's an inefficient experience. Buyers are frustrated, our customers are frustrated, your engineers are frustrated, you have inefficient execution. And that's why it's really, really important to be on top of these things, have a predictable routine in every single interaction, every single routine that you do. The more and more you do, as I said earlier, it will become your habit. And the more habitual it will be, you will come across as an excellent kind of expert as well.
This is absolutely amazing. The last 5 minutes or so, I was all grin because this is so true, right? We have seen this again and again. And if I have to sum it up, I would say a predictable person is a dependable person, right?
Hmm.
So
I love
what
it.
you're trying to do is I can look at this person and I can trust that person by saying that, hey, if this person is on it, I don't have to look into it. So that is what we are trying to create. So absolutely love this. So if I have to sum this up entirely, I would say you need to have a predictable pipeline. You need to have a predictable process, which means predictable prospecting. And for a predictable prospecting, you need to have predictable salespeople who have a predictable process. And once you have a predictable process, then you have a predictable routine where you block and make sure that you hit the things on your table on a daily basis. So, am I missing anything, Aditya?
No, I think that's very well said. Yeah. At the end of the day, it boils down to you can have predictable pipeline when you have an organization where, as you rightly said, people you can depend on, people who are predictable. They do certain things in a certain fashion. The more you are able to do that, you have that efficiency as your strength of an organization rather than inefficient organization where you have to chase people, you have to ask them to do certain things again and again. That's what you're trying to avoid.
Amazing. All right. So we have covered quite some ground on this topic today. And I think this is a good time to call it a wrap on this topic. One thing that we would like to remind you, and feel free to get back to us with any questions that you might have at the end of this topic or anything that you think that we should cover deeper. We would love to do that. And as always, feel free to subscribe to our show, give us 5-star ratings, and we would continue to deliver better content every single time.
Absolutely. And do share your comments, ask questions, let us know. Do you agree with our philosophies, our thought process? How are we operating? How are we building our own SaaS company? Always open to hear other perspectives. So, like our podcast, and subscribe to our channel so you'll get notified about it, and then comment on it. So let us know. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.